Yeah.
Okay, I've got a tree being cut down behind the house and skip being put out in the road, and I feel like I'm in the building site, so apologies in advance if it gets a bit loud. So I'll just start by just running through our pre-work that we put forward. Obviously, given that the vast majority of the funding allocated to Salford has been put into capacity, that's meant that this current period, the past 3 months since March, we've seen obviously quite a lot of change in terms of the structure of roles, those that we've all obviously remained still in post, but we've had quite a big shift in our daily responsibilities. So that's obviously what we wanted to put across in the pre-work. So obviously we've got myself and Claire here today. Usually the core operational team is James McInerney from Public Health, Peter Locke from Health Improvement Service, Asa Keenan, Salford Youth Alliance, Eileen Buchan from Salford Youth Service, and Ben Andrews from Empower Youth. So for the most part, we've all been able to commit some time to the LDP during this period, with the obvious exception of James and Pete. That was due to open at the beginning of April. Obviously, we've had to put that on pause. Salford Youth Alliance was then supposed to be running their inactivity targeted sessions from that facility. Obviously, that's not been able to happen, so they've taken their offer online. That online offer has been both successful and challenging. Successful in the sense that there's been strong engagement with that, and ASA has decided that they're going to, when normality does resume, they're going to continue that offer. So they're doubling up from both the virtual and the physical, because they feel that it gives them different levels of engagement for young people. The challenge coming with that is that due to the age of some of the young people they were previously engaging with, they've not been able to keep that correspondence with them. So quite a few have unfortunately fallen through the gap.
Of course, Bob did as well. Lose it.
You know, as lovely as being locked in a room with Manchester is, I was just a bit like, help.
Particularly some of the larger PCSE groups that Claire will be working with, and some of the connections she's looking to build around schools. All of that work has been put on pause due to a change in circumstance for those groups, and it's unclear as to what that might look like on the other side. So whether Claire will be able to revisit those conversations. I know there was a number of events that Claire had planned around the city, festivals for promoting the work that PCSE groups are doing. There is the hope that this can be revisited. In addition to that, CBS took the decision to freeze small grants investment that Claire oversees. So again, that's an opportunity that has been frozen at the moment. A couple of those groups that were underway and gaining some real traction, particularly in Eccles. Unfortunately, their participation has plummeted during this period. So that has obviously been a big challenge for Claire, and big focus for Claire's work when normality does resume in some way will be picking up the contact with those kind of groups and trying to regain this lost period of engagement. In relation to myself, both myself and ASA from within SCL obviously have undertaken responsibility for other staff that are temporarily furloughed. The big challenge that I found is, for the most part, it almost feels like taking a step 12 months back and trying to revisit conversations from scratch, because there is that that unknowing of who the right contact is. So, for example, if I wanted to contact a group or a school that are of potential importance, could have an impact in physical activity for young people, who I contact on a typical staffing list may not be there, they may not pick up that correspondence. So knowing who to link up with has been a big challenge. Where existing contacts are in place, or multiple contacts within the same organisation, that's obviously continued and it's been a lot more smooth. But where conversations may be a little bit weak because we've not built that strong connection yet, in the same regard as the work that Claire's done, a lot of that has been lost, which obviously has slowed the progress we've been able to make in particular areas. In relation to the work that Ben Andrews has been doing, big challenge for Ben in terms of his consultancy work that he's been providing in Salford is, given that there is such a sudden shift in priority. Take, for example, Salford Community Leisure. He's done some really strong work with us over the past 12 months. All of a sudden now our priority is keeping jobs. So the work that Ben has put in, I know myself that it's still very much on my radar, but for colleagues it may not be. So that's a big challenge for Ben, is to see on the other side of this, has that work been embedded and will it continue to progress, or does he have to start again from scratch? And my final point, sorry, I'm switching between documents there. Across those of us that have still been able to keep some time commitment to the LDP, we've still been involved in a number of different partnership discussions. For the most part, these are discussions that would have happened anyway. We're fortunate in Salford that there is a lot of active, positive partnership working across various local authority teams, charities, private organisations as a force of habit, particularly concerning engagement with children and young people. However, we've found that during lockdown, we've been able to possibly steer some of those conversations in a slightly different direction to the benefit of our LP focus. So the main one that I've commented on in the pre-work is Salford and Manchester are at the moment going through the process of enhancing a thriving education programme, which is based around mental health support. And physical activity is to be used as a mechanism for positive change within that structure. Salford Community Leisure would always be in that conversation, given the nature of the trust, as would Salford Youth Service, School Sports Partnership. We'd always be in those conversations, but what we've been able to do during this period is direct some of that focus into integrating different levels of physical activity sector into that conversation. So rather than just purely focusing on schools, can we tie in community engagement? Can we tie in wider services like the youth service, like housing associations that fund particular activities in communities? Can we tie in different specialist facilities, PRUs, special schools, ones that may possibly previously be overlooked? So, as I say, it's not necessarily an LP conversation, but we've been able to direct how that moves. From myself, I think that's it. I'm quite happy to take any questions. Anything that myself or Claire can't answer in relation to the work from other colleagues within Salford, obviously I can just get back to everyone. I can send it through either direct or through Nicole. Any questions from anyone?
So I'll just jump in with my question. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's been really insightful to read your information ahead of this call. Seems like Salford's quite an interesting place in that, you know, 22,000 inactive children, young people. That's huge. And obviously you're looking at young females within that. So I guess my first question is, how do you ensure that you capture the voice of children, young people in leading change for themselves? And are young people involved in decision making, maybe at steering group level?
Yeah, so in relation to at steering group level, Eileen Buchan from Salford Youth Service represents a youth voice. So Eileen sits on all of our discussions. Eileen puts forward perspectives for the young people on their behalf, but also on a closer level on the ground. Salford Youth Alliance, all of their programming. So, for example, the den that was proposed to open, all of the activity programming for that facility is being driven by young people. So their volunteers and the young people that they identified in schools as being inactive are driving what that activity looks like. What would they like to do? When would they like to do it? Do they want it to be just on their own? Do they want it with families? All of those kind of details being completely driven by young people. In a similar respect, the work that Claire's doing with the small investments, it's not a case of Claire doing what she thinks is good. So I gave the example of the girls group in Eccles, which unfortunately now has been put on pause. That was driven by a group of girls that already met in a girls group at a local youth club. They wanted to access the facility down the road, which is a boxing gym, but it's also got Olympic weights in there. They do wrestling, various different things. That activity was driven by their wants and needs, as opposed to what Claire identified as an opportunity. In a similar respect, as I have conversations with schools, colleges, grassroots sports clubs, I try and, for the most part, combine number one, input from the powers that be, the head teachers, the club managers, secretaries, whoever it may be, but also those young people that are accessing those services, or the children attending those schools, young people attending the colleges. What is it that they want? And then from that, that informs what opportunities I seek out within the city and highlight to them. So, for example, we were pre-lockdown, we were working on an opportunity with Salford City College Worsley campus, which is in our target area. Obviously, a lot of the students don't necessarily live there, but they are within that area studying. I was working on an opportunity to link girls and young women's activity in one of our leisure centres nearby, closed sessions for the students in between lessons, because they identified they didn't want sport, they wanted fitness-based classes, so like HIIT classes, body combat, that kind of thing. So as I say, we across the board with everything that we do, we try to let the young people steer what it is they want, and then we find that solution to it.
And I'd just say that we also follow the values, the key principles of the investment fund, and that's about that co-production. You know, my work does a special, well, everybody's work does, doesn't it? You know, and that's all about engagement with the children.
Claire,
okay, thanks. Yes, to my okay.
No, go on, Stephen.
Thanks. Yeah, so my follow-up question to that is, it seems in what I've written that one of the symptoms it suggests that prevents people being active is a lack of capacity or a lack of engagement models to enable people to be active. So I just wonder, in the whole test and learn element of system redesign, where you're seeing success or potential replication of something that enables a whole movement of people to be active. Because maybe my concern is that the LDP money might go into a hole, but it might not be enough to stimulate this regeneration of opportunities to be active. What conversations are you having around that? That's what I'm interested in.
In relation to that, during this period since March, it's almost been that opportunity of we've not necessarily had a real book to work off. It's been that little bit of an unknown, so it's even pushed that test and learn a little bit more in that we are forced to. We are working in new ways, particularly, as I say, like the likes of the Youth Alliance, the likes of the Youth Service, that are doing it on the ground, sort of delivery engagement in communities. They no longer can do the usual of mass participation, advertising publicly, don't necessarily know what works outside of that, because we've never been forced to before. So, for example, in Salford Youth Service, split up into various teams across the city, they're working now on different ways of engaging. So each area of Salford has a different engagement strategy for the young people within that area. And then based on the successes or failures of that engagement, that's being then replicated across different parts of the city. So, for example, at the moment in the South area, which isn't South, but it's called South, Eccles, Barton, Earl Cadishead, which is over towards your sort of Wigan direction, they're working on engagement programs where they are combining door-to-door home visits with young people that are on the radar, and then combining that with online offers. So it's very targeted online engagement, as opposed to different parts of the city which are trying to go for mass participation in terms of online access. So open sessions that they're pushing far and wide through as many different contacts within their local area as possible, utilising school links, utilising different grassroots club links, and then based on the successes of those different areas, they're then sharing that learning and tweaking and adjusting how they implement things within their area. Something, again, that Youth Alliance are also adopting. They have, although for the LDP, they are focused in Littleton and Wharton, they've also got another programme at the other end of the city in Otto Langwither. So what they're trying in one area where it works or does not work, they're then looking to replicate that in Littleton and Wharton to increase how how well they're engaging with the young people. So not necessarily the activities as such, but what is the strategy behind getting them engaged on a regular basis for positive outcomes.
One from me, and it's sort of in a similar vein to Stephen's question. Just wondering, I suppose this is more a physical activity question than one for the local pilot. Are you aware of, or are you doing anything external facing on a large scale to keep physical activity levels up or put downward pressure on physical inactivity levels? I'm just thinking along a Marcom's public relations kind of perspective as well, but also, you know, if you want to keep momentum going, is there anything that you're actually doing now that people are seeing and taking advantage of, et cetera, et cetera?
Salford CVS initially, when they was doing the support work with the local communities, used the that counts leaflets and promoted that to all the VCSE groups, you know, to share out to the wider audience. So that's something that we've done on a wider scale. It's difficult with the guidance at the moment to, you know, not be doing leaflets and things like that. That was like an electronic one, and there was some physical leaflets given out. Mike, have you got any answers on that?
Yeah, I suppose during this particular period, as I'm sure every local authority, I know from like conversations that I've had, particularly on a club development perspective, that we're finding at the moment we're very conscious in Salford of striking the balance between promoting and not promoting too much. So we're finding, first of all, we have found in Salford that our grassroots clubs and VCSE groups are, generally speaking, I am generalising, not as badly affected as we thought they might be. In terms of financial support, their concern is maybe returning to normal activity rather than surviving. In a similar regard with children and young people, we've been very conscious that online burnout happened about 2 months ago. So it's, from our side, we're trying to strike that balance of how do we engage children and young people, in particular for LDP, without disengaging them by pushing too hard. How do we reinvent that close personal touch that we usually have in communities and that real local knowledge? How do we translate that to online platforms or socially different distant ways of working without pushing those engagement pathways away. So I think that's something I'm being quite conscious of. In terms of across the board generalised physical activity promotion, Salford Community Leisure have relayed messaging, as have CBS, as have public health, various council teams at different levels, as well as local neighbourhood teams pushing that out to their PCSE groups, housing associations, and back to that, other local charities that are active. So in terms of the stakeholders or potential stakeholders in the city, that messaging has been pushed forward. But as I say, we are very conscious that we don't overdo it in that regard. And we've been regularly using our feet on the ground, so to speak, particularly with the likes of the youth service, to see what is actually going on, what is the change in young people being out and about. Are they out and about purely because they're bored at home, or are they out and about with a purpose? And then that's informed how we then engage with them, particularly through online measures.
Mike, you mentioned in your pre-work about one of your successes was the Salford Youth Alliance online programme of activity.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, really, I've kind of got a few questions around it. So was there any particular online offer prior to COVID, or was it purely just as part of a response to that? And has the kind of learning and outcomes of that approach perhaps change the way going forwards that the Youth Alliance might take it with LDP work at all?
Yeah, so in answer to your first part, there was no online offer. So they had social media purely for promotion, advertising, key information, the general kind of stuff that we all do. But in terms of actual active engagement online, it was non-existent. So the way that they work is they have a core team of staff, or 4 members of staff that work across the 2 areas in Salford. They are the feet on the ground, as well as their various volunteers at different levels of, don't like to use the word, but competency, confidence. So those volunteers that have only just come on board, as well as those that maybe been with the programme for a long time, maybe a bit more experience. They would do that face-to-face traditional engagement. What they've managed to do to make that change is to, obviously, the core team of staff, with the exception for some maybe additional responsibilities within SEL, have been pretty much fully committed to LDP still. So they've been able to focus all of their energy into the online engagement. They've done that with some generic stay-at-home challenge kind of engagement.
Right.
So more broad clickbait kind of activity, just your general get busy kind of stuff. But they've combined that with some more targeted, involved work. So they've done things like healthy cooking. They've done activities in the back gardens that you can replicate. Again, driven by those volunteers that have been on board for a long time and maybe got a little bit more confidence and experience. They have also found within that process that some of those volunteers that have maybe not taken the forward step previously have been given that confidence to do so, because it is online, because the face isn't necessarily seen, because they're not stood in front of a group of loud 10, 11-year-olds that are all shouting and screaming. All of those barriers are taken away. So they found that some of the volunteers are actually raising the confidence and really taking this as a positive. Again, the main thing that they're taking out of this is they're finding that particularly typically inactive children and young people are potentially suffering from mental health issues, possibly, as well as a variety of different things. They're the children and young people that may benefit from those kind of platforms where it isn't a potentially imposing situation where you are stood face to face and there's a lot of pressure on you. having that withdrawal and being able to engage from your own home, your own bedroom, wherever it is. They're seeing the real value of that, so that's something that will continue post-lockdown, as well as that traditional face-to-face engagement, which is almost the bread and butter of the programme. So definitely seen, I have as well from the outside, the value of that two-pronged approach.
No, it's interesting. Thanks, Mike. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Has anyone else got any kind of questions on the pre-work at all, or?
I'll just obviously in the pre-work it asked around the successes and the challenges. Obviously, it's been a different 3 months than anyone would have expected. Well, 3 months ago we maybe would have expected it, but it's been a very strange time in the last sort of 4 months. What's been your biggest learning?
I think that's obviously quite broad. And across, obviously, I think we've probably found that because we are very much a team within Salford, there's, typically there's about half a dozen of us working on this. We're all finding very different challenges, very different successes. For example, for Ben, a lot of his work has almost dried up to an extent because those big groups that he would usually work with, he can't work with because they don't, for the time being, they don't exist. For me, I think it's maybe highlighted that some of those connections are possibly within communities across different sectors have maybe shown that they are either stronger or weaker than I possibly thought. So as I mentioned, in some organisations, some groups, I've got 2, 3, 4 links into that group. So maintaining that contact during this period has been really easy. So if my one contact at, say, a grassroots club packs up, flies to the other side of the world, all my contact is lost there and I'm starting again from scratch. And I think that's maybe something that I didn't put as much importance on or value as much pre-lockdown. Almost took it for granted in some cases.
Cool. I know, Mike, you've answered that for yourself. Claire, while you're on, what would you say your biggest learning over the last few months has been? Because obviously you all do work as a team, but as you said, it is individual learnings, and it's just good for everyone here.
Just about being adaptable and trying to learn new things, getting to grips with different ways of working. It has been a massive learning curve, and I found it quite difficult because I was so excited and I was so on board and ready to launch all these things, and it's not happened. So I think learning that maybe that it was going well. Obviously, we just need to sort of redirect it slightly so that we're following all the guidance and stuff, and hopefully it can get back to that some way somehow.
Claire, is there anything that you can? Obviously, it's really disappointing that that's not been able to go ahead for you. The stuff that you've planned. But I mean, have you got any learning or anything that you can kind of take out of that for perhaps the next opportunity?
I think just working, hopefully, with the groups when they're back up and running, and seeing if we can maybe rechange what we was going to deliver, do it in smaller groups, do it in a different way. And hopefully, things will change and we can go back to being in bigger groups and, having that, and hopefully, we could do it again. Just about being flexible, isn't it? And going with the flow.
I've got a follow-up question from Nick. Says, you've obviously learned a lot, and I think it's particularly about using online platforms. Who do you think would benefit from this learning that you've kind of you've taken from this experience? Is there anybody that you think would be particularly interested in?
GCSEs maybe, because I know from my conversations with them, I was like, would you be willing to do it online? Would you want to share online videos? And they just didn't want to do that. They wasn't in a place. I think they like the face-to-face, and it's trying to overcome that barrier of having, I'm used to this now, but I think that would have, maybe they would be, need that support, some of them. Mike?
Yeah, I think just by extension, that's something that we've discussed in Dan's sessions with club development across GM. We've all kind of identified in everyone's area that a lot of if I say grassroots clubs, they're volunteer based and not necessarily, they don't have this skill set necessarily because they've never had to before. Whereas in the same vein that we would bring in an 18-year-old with a passion for coaching, can we bring in an 18-year-old with a passion for social media who's got that skill set to be able to develop things for clubs? So that's something we're potentially working on in Salford.
No, well, so we've got about 50 seconds left or so, but thank you, Mike. If anyone does have any further questions or, you know, any comments at all, Mike, are you happy for them to email you directly?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Any final reflections before we all get chucked out?
No, and thanks for being kind with your questions.
Yeah, good work, Salford.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Claire.
Yes.
Thank you.
No. Well,
I've got to send out on Friday and I cannot wait. Look at it. Oh my God. Oh,
I have to confess,
this is
I was queued
I
up
don't
outside
like
the
these
barbers.
online meetings because I have to look at myself. Oh God. Well, yeah.
Looks very nice, Tom.
You don't have to make an
Back in
appointment.
trim.
No, we're talking.
Yeah, looks
we're
fresh
talking
trim,
about a
as
very
my boys would say.
a very local barbers who have a very relaxed view about social distancing, PPE, and the such like. And as such, I was able to walk straight in at 9 o'clock, and was out by 9:20. So I was very happy.
Just got quarantined for 14 days now.
Yeah.
So fun. Fab, go on, Claire.
Do you want me to go? Do you want me to crack on? Do you want me just to carry on? Yeah. Right. So 3-month reflection. When I came to do this, I found it quite hard because I kind of feel like there's not a lot happened over the 3 months. Mainly because, as you'll all know, I've been seconded while Anna's been at Sport England on a secondment. So I kind of feel it's just been me that's been trying to drive a lot of this. So in terms of the success I picked up on, it's something that's kind of been lingering for probably longer than the 3 months. But the example that I wanted to pick up on was really just about how, from our point of view, or how I think it's starting to work in terms of, although I feel it's been quite a slow process. I mean, I've only really been doing this role since this time last year. But how things are starting to join up and people are starting to join up and the thinking is starting to join up across the system. So in terms of trying to make sure that when the people on those steering group actually have a role to play on it. So what we're quite conscious of is that we don't want people just to come and sit around that table and not be talking about the LP when they go out that room, because what would be the point in them being there? And the example that I've obviously given is around our active transport officer. So when we found out about the funding for the Mayor's, what's it called now? The Mayor's Challenge Fund. Originally, that kind of came into the active transport officer. It came to the members, and it was a case of go out there and get a list of the projects, and then give me a short list, which started off. I think it was about 40 possible projects. And because I know the active transport officer, she then invited me into a meeting with sort of planning and transport, and we started to talk about the different areas and locations. I noticed Glodick wasn't even on the list, and I was able to sort of slip in there, have you thought about this area in Glodick, and was able to give them the reasons why, talk about the LP and the other projects that were potentially going to be happening around there, some of the work that was going on with the wider community, and they all turned around and went, actually, that's a good shout, and it could be something that's doable. So that list from the 40 odd people, 40 odd areas, sorry, then became a short list of about 8. And then I believe it then became a short list of 2. So along with Glodick and one other project, those are the 2 that have been put forward to TFGM for that pot of money. So we're still to hear about that. But that was just an example of how that joining up is starting to work. And then the other side of that is how, by people being aware of the LP, they sort of want to be involved. They don't necessarily see that there's always going to be money around, but because it's something bigger than just Glodick or just Oldham, it's something that's being talked across at a GM level. They want to feel the part of that. So in terms of actually what we've spent to date in Oldham, it's very, very little. We've had a lot of in-kind support or cashless commissioning, if you like. So if we look at Glodick as another example of that, just before lockdown, we had lots of things planned, but again, none of it was funded through local pilot. We were engaged with Street Games. They were doing a mentoring project there as part of the Home Office project. So we were looking at some interventions there around young people and becoming sort of activator training for them. There was a celebration event that was going to happen in April, obviously had to be put on hold. We were looking at some indoor cycle training with TFGM. So again, that was TFGM funded, but again, it was through my connections and linking people and organisations together. That had to be put on hold. And we were also looking at a project for a piece of land called Pitt Street, which has historically had lots and lots of problems in Glodick. It attracts a lot of antisocial behaviour. It was when we had the riots, it was a centre of that. It's just a piece of wasteland, and there's some plans to make that into a nice space which is usable by the community. It's a nice relaxing area. It could be used for yoga, it could be used for social gatherings, it could be used for growing. You know, it's in an area where there's lots and lots of terraced housing. So again, that all linked into the discussions around the Mayor's Activation Fund, because it's in that similar area. So it was levering in these other bits of funding just through different conversations. So I believe we were not back for some green dividend funding for that, but I've just had a conversation with somebody and they've actually applied for some police funding to get that piece of land looked at, and we'd sort of committed, I think it was only about £3,000 of LP funding as some match for that. But that would be a really valuable piece of work, because it's looking at the green space and the growing and engaging some of those local residents with that. But it has been led by the community as well. It's been led by the Xali Trust. So again, it's linking some pots of money, but they've been leading those conversations. It's not necessarily us or me, but it's been able to connect those bits. So I think that's where I feel that we've been quite, well, we're starting to see success, and I feel that that's sort of working better. In terms of the challenges, I guess everybody's in the same boat with the challenges. You know, I'd put in here the communities that we're working in, especially Glodick, is very, very complex. It's somewhere that's had a lot of support through the years, but it's always been looked at probably in quite a deficit-based way. And it's really turning the thinking with that community to get them to think about the assets that they have in the community, and encourage and really, really working with them to do more for themselves, because they're so used to having things either done for them or having money given to them, that we struggle with those conversations about making things sustainable, around physical activity, how they see physical being in a building, kind of changing the mindset of that community. But I think partly that's because they're starting to happen. For the example I gave before, Trafford were in that conversation about how over lockdown and over Ramadan, people were still going out walking, so they were breaking the fast and going for a walk before they broke the fast. So they were doing that even though they were fasting. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. That I don't think would have happened in the past. And the lady from the organisation said, no, I know, that's fantastic. So these people were being real role models, saying, well, it's actually okay to still be physically active while you're fasting, and possibly taking a healthier approach to it as well. So for me, that is a challenge. It's about shifting that thinking with the community, but it's that conflict between whether the approach that they want to take, if it is traditional, is that still okay? Do you know, if that's how they want to do it, because if we're really going for co-production and co-design, that is possibly okay, isn't it? So that's one that would be interesting to hear what other people's thoughts are on that. And then I guess the other challenge I put in there was obviously, again, it's come up before, it's about finding the right people in to help drive that change. You know, although we don't want this to be a top-down approach, in terms of actually making those changes and those system changes, we do need to have that top-down approach. So to me, it's a bit of both. It's using those really good examples of what's happened on the ground, but how do we get to those top people to demonstrate that that change is happening and it's a good thing? So I'll put that one out there.
Yeah, I think it's a good challenge. One of the ones that I picked up within your pre-work was this, and I think you did ask it last time, I think, as well, in your 3 months, around, do you need like new ideas? Like, you're asking people for new ideas, and do they need them? Well, what you're picking up on there is is it a change of approach? So it's interesting if anybody else has got kind of managed to shift away from this, us do everything for people, or we do it for free because there's funding or whatever, and that shift to they actually truly do it themselves because they're kind of bought into it.
Claire, can I just ask you, I'm so sorry if you mentioned it, but you were kind of breaking up in my end a little bit towards the end, so sorry if I just literally didn't hear it. Have you noticed any kind of COVID specific learning in terms of what's been happening on the ground, of people basically stopping to wait for the NHS to intervene and the local authority to intervene and the hubs to be set up, but actually doing things for themselves? And what can we pick up from that experience and kind of carry with us? I'm assuming that happened in Oldham like it happened pretty much everywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, the community response was unbelievable. And in the Glodic community, which is probably the one we're closer to, they have been absolutely amazing, you know, in terms of their approach. So, for example, the Ghazali Trust was one of our food distribution hubs, you know. So initially when we set up, there was 5 food bank hubs, and they were one, and we only closed that down about 3 weeks ago because the demand wasn't there. But they had that building open, and they had volunteers every day. So yeah, and we've seen local councillors from that community again volunteering. They kept volunteering up at the main food hub as well. They've been fantastic. So the community have really rallied together, and I think it comes back to some of what Annette was saying before from Tameside about how do we capitalise on these volunteers that have given up their time, you know, really come together, to not let them just disappear again. We don't want to put too much on them, but even if it's conversations, even if it's capitalising on you know, the social isolation aspect, for example, you know, the fact that you've got people who could be connectors for vulnerable, isolated people into other things, because I'm sure a lot of these volunteers now are much aware of what's out there locally that they possibly might not have been before. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
yeah, it's happening across a lot of other places. I know the work that Annette is doing in Tameside. There's some similar work going on in Bolton around really radically rethinking the role of volunteering and how you can steer somebody who, I don't know, say volunteer to give food banks into moving into a physical activity space and vice versa, so that there isn't a hierarchy of I'm a better volunteer than you type thing. And I was just wondering, because that appetite is still there, and a lot of those groups that are no longer giving out food parcels potentially don't want to stop in terms of the community cohesion and all the rest of that.
Yeah.
Is how can we basically grab that with both hands?
Absolutely. And I know that the people who've been involved with the distribution of food parks will say that's the most rewarding part about this was going to somebody's door, stepping back, but having a conversation with somebody who's possibly not seen anybody for days. That could still happen, couldn't it? There's absolutely no reason to say that that couldn't happen. What's to say that that person can't say, we're going for a walk. Do you fancy coming for a walk around the park or around the block? These people don't need to be fitness experts. So this is something we want to capitalise on around the walking and looking at informal walking training as well, to say, you know, it's legitimate and it's okay just to go for a walk with somebody who's not necessarily your best friend, or obviously with social distancing, but you know, for that person that has been isolated and it's somebody that they know and they recognise, you know, because they've had that connection with them through the food packs, you know, being able to build on some of that, I think is a really, really good and valid point, really. And yeah,
I think it's really good. I think it's quite similar to we were juggling around an idea of what we were calling influencers some time ago, and I think we had this discussion quite many moons ago about how we'd use people who were influential in the community, who weren't, as you say, who aren't fitness professionals, but are people with influence who could potentially say to someone, join me for a walk or join me for X or Y, to be active in a slightly different way. But almost physical activity is secondary to the social connection bit, and probably this stuff that's, I think it's all of us, I suppose, recognizing where the level is in terms of the priority of physical activity, and kind of just being a bit kind of cute around how it's packaged and sold. And I think that's what's coming through quite clear from other discussions, and what we've seen from the pre-work is that people are being very good at kind of sidling up next to the priority with a little bit of a solution that is physical activity.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting as well in Berry's pre-work. So if you have a look through that one, they are building on the food parcels and kind of rolling that into their holiday hunger program as well. And then they're also trying to get, I think, how they go and pick it up at the school or whatever they do, but then having provision there in terms of people having those healthy conversations with them around food, but then also additionally, I think they've got some extra funding, so as well as the food parcel, they get like a lunch, like a sandwich or whatever, and they can stay and do like a bit of activity with their teams whilst they're there, or start having those conversations as well, like say just how they link in with walking routes or those kind of things. So it doesn't have to be, you know, you do this physical activity program here, you can kind of go away and do your own thing, but just kind of using that as a stepping stone as well.
Claire, can I ask you a controversial question? How many Majids do you have? Oh, I've lost her.
So when you're asking the controversial questions, she's off. Just like, see you later.
Sorry, I'm breaking up.
I just find it really, really fascinating. And when you want to cite a really, really good example of community engagement, you just know that the word Ghazali Trust is going to be part of the conversation. And I just wonder within what is potentially also local internal politics within the community, is there a rightly or wrongly perceived perception of, if you like, use your suspects doing it all?
Well, yeah, I think we've had this discussion, haven't we, you know, in terms of we go with who's recommended, but who's to say the people that we really want to get to are people that are, you know, subscribe to that person's views or ideals about the way things should be done locally. I mean, we put a lot through the Vision 31 group, and the Vision 31 group asks a lot of us, but does every resident in Partington know what Vision 31 is and the people involved in it? And the answer is they don't. You know, and it's kind of, they're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And the kind of, I suppose, they start somewhere. And I suppose our role really is to tease out if there are other people who are a part of the makeup of the place that could initiate conversations, or could, with the right tools, or if access to finance, or people like us, or knowing that there's a big system backing them up, would step up and go, well, I can do what Vision 31 are doing. I don't necessarily need to go to their board meetings and be part of what they do, but I could be a person of influence. And even if it was with 5 other people, it'd still be influencing 5 people that we might never have engaged with before. So I suppose it's kind of, yeah, I don't necessarily think I think it's, as with all things, there's not necessarily a right and wrong in that, is there, I guess. But I suppose it's been the confidence of knowing that the altruistic outcomes will come out the back of it.
Possibly as well, Tom, does it link to the point, I mean, Claire was rightly shining a light on it herself in terms of saying, well, look, we're coming in and we're saying we need kind of bottom-up approaches, and we've got to get away from a culture of people just, going with what's being sort of delivered. But is that right? If people are standing back and then saying, okay, for the Ghazali Trust, if those other groups aren't there and they're quite comfortable with that, is that another thing for us to reflect upon? And I often think in relation to this, what is the purpose of us saying, let's kind of adopt that different sort of approach of not, of allowing people to develop things for themselves? What's the perceived driver of that? Is it like a David Cameron big society? Well, you do it, because we ain't got any money, so you do it. Or is it actually about helping people to design the kind of world that they want to live in? And we can't always answer that question, can we?
Well, I think I think it's a very interesting point. I think there's a view that we would portray that we are doing it for the altruistic, self-enabling, self-empowering reasons, but actually behind it, that is we can't afford to do it, and if they don't do it, then no one will do it. And I think, like, the thing that sprung to mind is there's always a perceived void in a place, whatever that may be it there's a lack of X or Y, whatever that, and that void for some reason needs to be filled, either with someone or with something. And sometimes actually are we best off saying, well, the void exists for a reason, and that might be outside of our control, and actually are we pushing people into that void unwillingly, or are we potentially setting, because I think we keep asking ourselves the question, and quite rightly, we keep getting asked the question around the community challenges. What's the sustainability in the community challenges, given that their premise is just to get things started? And that's why we kind of, the whole suite of support for the wraparound services, that we know that every organisation, hopefully, that we come in contact with or comes in contact with, that will be in a better place. But what if they don't want to be in a better place? What if they're very happy with status quo? And so I suppose it's kind of, do we become agents of change, or do we become agents of chaos in a place? And I think it becomes a very complex picture when you're moving into places that's got a very rich tapestry of people, their understanding of place and their ownership of the things and the assets in that place, whether it's a physical control or just a perceived control of things. And I think I'm forever kind of, as you can see, I'm forever kind of trying to understand what role are we really playing, and are we being beneficial, of benefit, or are actually we just, because we know we've got to achieve something, we've got to be doing something in a place. And I think it'd be very difficult if we turn back to decision makers locally and went, we shouldn't do anything there, we should just leave it. Just let it go feral, and let's see what happens. I can't see that getting past go, but it might be actually the best thing for that place.
Well, maybe, but I suppose then, you come back to the sort of the driver around the pilot. Ultimately, we want more people to live more active lives. And if you look at it from an evaluation perspective, I guess what we're saying is, there's a theory out there that's saying if you involve local people in determining the best ways to those solutions, you will have more success than if you don't. So I suppose the interesting thing from our perspective here is that right in this kind of context? And maybe maybe it is right, but at the same time there's a blockage to that then there's some local people that just don't want to be involved in that process. So how do you navigate that? If that's the route to getting people more active, but they're saying we don't want it, then there's a kind of bit of a sort of fundamental challenge around, well, do we have to ignore the fact that they don't want it and actually kind of impose some solutions from higher up? Not for me to answer the question, but I think it's an interesting one that's being posed here.
Mm.
There's something around solutions as well. I'm a bit uncomfortable with the word solution, in the same way that, you know, when people talk about social prescribing, I'm a bit uncomfortable about the word prescription, because you immediately think of ownership. You know, whose solution is that? And in the midst of the crisis, and to pick up on what Claire was saying around challenging that perception of deficit-based, needing things to be done for me, I'm in a crisis, or even a bigger crisis through COVID. Like Tom says, how do you play that shrewd game of where do you position physical activity in amongst the chaos? And the chaos is going to get worse before it gets better, and that much we know in terms of socioeconomic consequences, welfare, mental well-being, you name it, it's horrendous. So how do we position ourselves in that chaos, and in a sense kind of swap it around in the way that we are not the ones doing the swapping? And what if people don't want to swap?
Yeah.
Claire, before you disappeared, we were just, it's really funny because I literally started saying I've got a controversial question, and you just went. It's just like, okay. It's just
trying to get out of it, Kat. No, go on, ask me it. Go on. How much time we got?
I'm not the RM for Oldham, so I'm just kind of picking up bits and pieces in reports and pieces of writing. And what strikes me is that when there is a mention of community engagement and successful community cohesion, partnership work, and that sort of thing, inevitably the Ghazali Trust is mentioned. And I was wondering whether is that in itself potentially a bit of a thorn in your side, in that is the Ghazali Trust and Majid, do they really speak for the community, the whole of it?
Yeah. Me and Anna were having this conversation the other day. So to give a bit of background, Majid's obviously been involved right from the beginning when the Sport England came to Greater Manchester. They were involved in the interview. So they've been really integral. Majid sits on our steering group. He's been involved in activating the community. Is he a gatekeeper to the community? So he says he talks for the community, but is he actually only talking for a small part of that community? That is a really good question, and I think I know the answer to that. We also had to break some bad news to them because they'd asked the LP for a rather large sum of capital funding, which we then said we need to get some. We can't say yes. So GM and Sport England have said no, it shouldn't be getting used for that. They'd also applied for a Sport England capital funding. So they were very, very disappointed in that, very annoyed. And my worry was that would then affect the work that we were doing in Glodick, because I see them as being gatekeepers. However, for us politically, that's been a bit of a relief, because I think there are other providers, there are other organisations, there are other influential people in the community that if they had have got that money, that would almost been a more difficult conversation to have. As it is, I think we've managed to smooth over it with them. But Kat, I'm very, very aware that to me, I'm quite sure how we get around that one. And my feeling is that we've got to be seen to be given the same amount of time and support to those other community organisations in those communities, and that's probably the easiest way to manage it with them. So we can't be seen to be giving them preferential treatment over the other ones. So if we were giving them a large capital sum of money, why shouldn't somebody else ask for a large sum of money? Just because they've written sort of 2 pages of A4, I think they assumed that they were going to get this large pot of money. It was about £90,000 they wanted. And we've been trying to say to them, if you want a large sum of capital money, you're going to have to jump through hoops. You know, regardless, you will have to jump through hoops. We can't just be seen to give you the money because you've been involved from the beginning. It kind of doesn't work like that. But yeah, it is a difficult one because he is very influential. He's obviously got the ear of Sport England as well. You know, we see him retweeted a lot by Tim. And he does know a lot of people, but it's not everybody. And he's not, yeah, like you say, not necessarily talking for the whole community. So I don't know whether you read some of the pre-work stuff. We're actually going to, well, they've appointed somebody now, a community engagement manager, part-time, to look at some of the LP stuff, and a community worker. So for me, I can breathe a little bit of not a sigh of relief, but it will be a big, big help to have somebody who's got that area of expertise, who's perhaps coming into the borough that might not even know some of that political history, I guess, who can really look at it quite objectively. You know, they don't maybe have some of that history, although we'll preempt them, but the idea being that they can dedicate some of the time to really, really do some of that work with that community, which I probably not have the time. And I'm not gonna lie, the expertise in terms of that community engagement stuff, I think that will really, really help us. So still didn't answer your question, but yeah, it's a bit of a thorn.
Have you got that in Trafford, Lou and Tom, in terms of you've got your people on the ground and it's helpful to have those kind of people, but also it's difficult because then maybe there's then develops an expectation that they should get.
Yeah. I think the issue of parity is very, very difficult. As I was saying before, there is definitely there has been in some cases definitely the who shouts the loudest. But there's an element of also there's a bit of meritocracy in this as well, because some of those organisations shouting the loudest are also doing the work behind the shout to make things happen. So it's very difficult to be fair, and I think that's kind of, we came under some quite heavy criticism the first time we went round with our first round of community challenge funding, because we were accused of not being clear what it was for, and people assumed that because we weren't being clear that meant it had gone to certain people out of preference, and people were very confused, the fact that, why was it the amounts and that kind of stuff. And our answer was we sent this as far as we could, and we kept all the criteria and the routes to entry exactly the same. So effectively it was on the organisation themselves to do the work. But then what we know is that sometimes the people you want to come forward don't, and there's very good reasons why they don't. And some of that is to do with their beliefs and that kind of stuff. But also sometimes there's a lack of proactivity on their part. So it's kind of then where do you intervene, and then what's right. And I think that kind of reflected the conversation that we've all been having about what is our place, and are we agents for good and that kind of stuff, or are we potentially creating problems that we'll see in the future. You can't answer in 40 seconds, but you might want to try.
Yeah, I think it's hard, isn't it? I think it's having that offer for all, like a different offers and different ways of working, so you can try and cover as much as you can, but you're never going to reach anyone, and you're never going to please everyone. Like, there's probably just needs to be an acceptance in there. But yeah, it's really, really tough. And I think we're off.
Right, do you want me to start?
Yeah, that would be good actually, Wahid, if you could.
Just seeing how much time I can waste. Right, I've got 7 minutes now. Right, so basically, as you know, for the local pilot in Bolton, it's all been about learning from the inside, which is the theme that we've gone with. But one of the things that we were sort of thinking about is pre-COVID is we was just tapping into from the inside is doing some projects around that. Now, COVID has obviously given us the opportunity to use this environment where people are being more active and not that weren't active beforehand, and how do we use this opportunity and get them engaged. So one of the things that we've sort of developed is a new campaign or project in regards to using what's happening at GM Moving, and then you've got Let's Get GM Moving. We're using our insight and adapted it locally. So we've now made Let's Get Bolton Moving. So that maybe people can then resonate it more so because it's coming from Bolton, but if it was coming from outside the locality, they can see the branding coming from elsewhere. What we're going to do is 2 test beds, 2 cohorts. Is one, we'll be using Garmin to see if the Garmin feature will give them a nudge effect to keep them active. And the other one will be giving play equipment and we'll be logging their details online on a web-based app. We're hoping that we know time has probably been one of the key issues in why a lot of people can be active. And when they go back to going to work or whatever they want to be doing, is we don't want them to fall back into the old way of working. So yeah, that's where we've got to. The next stage is capturing that data and seeing if there's something that can be upscaled. Now, one of the other things that we got from our insight report was around buddying and marketing. So we're looking at the buddying element was to see is can we create communities on this online channel so people can meet other people. And then from the marketing side is, again, it's people getting behind a brand. So before this, we had a website called Let's Get Active Bolton, which used to be the central database for Bolton for activities, so people know where to go to. But that got shut down because it was just getting out of date. Now, this new website will hopefully look at signposting activities that we don't have to update, so it's not updating, and people will understand where they can get sessions from. So in a nutshell, that's our success. It's something that would normally take quite a long time to develop. It's taken a few weeks to get from an idea stage, something in the portfolio, and now it's waiting for approval. And the hope is people will get behind the brand, and then we can upscale it. So then when people say they don't know what's going on in their area, in 6 to 12 months time, they've got something that they know about and they can get behind and obviously use. Challenges is I think everyone sort of said the same thing, is how do you get it on the agenda at a more strategic level? Now, when I say that, we've obviously got assistant directors sitting on our steering group, but because everything's around COVID and economy, it's how do you make it relevant? So one of the things that we sort of hit in this website is, if anyone knows about Vitality Rewards, is if you do so many activities or hit so many steps, you get an achievement badge. And when you achieve so many achievement badges, what we're sort of going to do is tap into the local economy and say, like, if you've done 50,000 steps, you can get a smoothie from a local place. So that sort of gets us out in and making it part of the agenda of recovery. We see that type of model does work with Vitality, and we're hoping it works well in Bolton. So it's getting businesses on board. So this then becomes more of a central point. And obviously it's not going to be council orientated, because we've sort of learned that when we sort of use Bolton Council, as much as it is a brand that people recognise and understand, they sort of, whatever their thing that they've built up against it is, they just don't like that. So it's going to be sitting away from the council, and it'll look like it's its own brand. So yeah, that's sort of more or less it. You've sort of seen the pre-work, so you're good at reading. Some questions over.
Yeah, I'll start off weird. So in terms of, obviously you talked about the success, you've got the kind of app in production. You briefly mentioned the Get Bolton Moving, is that what it's called, the website where you kind of go on. Obviously, you said yourself it wasn't being used, it's kind of been a bit discarded. I mean, what do you see as a potential legacy for this app? Like what's length of time do you see it being used for?
Yeah, so we're going off the other model, which was called Get Active Bolton, and that was predominantly used by the social prescribing teams. They used that, but what happened was we all fell into the trap. The activities is just as up there as when people upload them. Now, obviously, there's stuff around open data that we could be going into, but at this moment in time, instead of making a website and then there's no sort of like community behind it, we're feeding it bottom up. So we start it small, and then bit by bit we'll grow it. So the end aim is obviously from people in Bolton is to know where to go to. So marketing is going to play a big factor, and then it'll be used again from social link prescribers, because I know they have their own database of activities locally, but again, it's only as good as the people using it, and we don't have access to that. So it's sort of a central point. That is the aim I see, and that's the success that we saw with the previous Get Active Bolton. But the reason why it stopped getting used was purely because it was stopped getting updated because there was no funding around it.
We had the same issue in Oldham. So we created our new website about 18 months ago, but we did exactly the same as you, where we removed all the dated stuff and we just put links onto other providers. So we put links directly through to the leisure provider or to different pages, so it wasn't a responsibility of someone to keep it up to date. It was just linking through to stuff, but it was like a one-stop shop for that information.
Yeah, and that's sort of the angle that we're hitting it. I think beforehand we were trying to do everything and we populate it, but again, it's really time consuming. So if you sort of can validate your sorted, yes, they're only as up to date as those individuals doing it, but it's not coming from us. Our key thing is being that central point. So when people think about moving more in Bolton, they know about going to this website, then going to a provider, going to community settings, going to other type of settings. But that is the aim. And I know there's a lot of details coming around open data, but again, it's doing something now that hopefully open data can tap into around when sessions are available. But yeah, key message from my insight is people don't know what's on their doorstep. Another good thing about I forgot to touch on was having a Facebook link. So what you tend to find is people don't update the website as much as they update Facebook. So our developers have looked into tried to tap into the Facebook page where you don't need a log on, but you'll get the details of when the sessions are becoming active. So if a session was to be cancelled, it'll update through that channel, then a website. And I think we do that quite commonly. I'll update on Sporting Bolton website through our marketing lead, then updating our website. So it's just learning from that.
Well, it's first time I've seen this. Looks cool. I like it. I feel like I'm Dragon's Den here. Obviously it's like some of the branding you've used there is very similar to the GM Moving one. If you think of GM Moving, no one actually owns it. It's like you've got lots of partners that feed into it. Who are the key partners and the key players in the Let's Keep Bolton Moving? You mentioned it's council hold it centrally. It's not going to be their logo on it. But who are the main people who will make this happen?
So we've got our physical activity steering group. So the chair of the group is from the community trust. So we've got that angle coming from there. We've got Bolton CVS, that is our into to grassroots level community clubs. And then we've got public health sitting on the steering board. So anything that's policy updated on new, like from Sport England or anything new information coming from, that'll be updated. So our key players will be, we have got the right organisations. I feel the only one that we don't have is the CCG. But one of the questions that we sort of keep going to is, do we need them at this moment in time? For us, the people that we have on now with Stephen Gray are the people that can make things happen. And when I mean that is why it's success is it's taken 3 weeks from an idea to get something developed and to get political approval. And that normally, I don't know if it's because of COVID, would not normally happen. It's just gone from one stage to another. The challenge is like I said, is how do you get that let's get moving project on everyone's agenda. So for me, it's using your right social media channels to get the community shouting about it for. And then when you get people shouting about it saying this is a great website, I can see uses in it, hopefully you get the political side. So it's I shouldn't be able to say this because it is being recorded, but it's playing the game to get the right backing.
So, like you mentioned public health there, so you got your public health director, like, were they aware of this, what's happening sort of thing? Was it coming from all levels of that, or is it some people have been involved with it? What's the sort of, who's...
So public health has been involved in the conversations from the start of when we said, what could we be doing now to capitalise on this period where people are being more active. So they're obviously putting things around about, obviously, active travel, stuff around there. But when we started about the language about moving more, they sort of agreed and said that we should be doing something around this. And theirs is sort of like the insight, because from a council perspective, we're sort of letting public health lead the way in what we're doing. So as long as we've got them on board, whether they sort of feed information or not, it's just good to have. The good thing around as well is the schools. So I know the local delivery part is not in a school setting, but what we sort of try to tap into is the people moving from home to school. So it's preschool. So it's around about thinking about ideas about advertising, cycling and walking. Now, again, I think Tracy sort of looking in, contacting the head teachers and developing a pack that would be branding around about, let's get Bolton moving. So again, you've got parents finding out this, not through the normal channels from our digital media, through schools. And what we're trying to do there is make it the norm. So if the head teacher makes it part of a policy that from a mile radius you have to walk for school, if you send that to your year one group parents, then it should become the norm in 5 years' time, and that is the aim. So there is a bigger landscape to this, but it's trying to brand it and market it in a way through different channels and not solely focusing on your hierarchy of policy where you get information, your digital channels and marketing. It's using every avenue, and then parents are probably your key individuals to sort of jump on board and use it as a Google search of what's going on.
It'd be like, obviously I've not seen it, and it would be great if sort of like the GPs and stuff were able to sort of get on the back of this and start sharing it with patients within their areas. As I said, I have only just seen it, but look good.
Yeah, I think we purposely made it more like GM Moving so that people can associate the brand, because again, the local pilot is a GM local pilot, but we want to be able to sort of resonate where people without locality, they can understand the branding. And we've purposely done the arrows forward. I know GM Moving is different directions, because moving in different directions, but we wanted to sort of show that moving in the right direction. So every part has sort of got a bit of thought with it.
I've got a question. I don't know if it's already been asked. So on your pre-work, you said about the platform and you're going to collect data from both wearable tech and manual uploads and everything. Is that, like, next question, linked to social prescribing? Because I've heard of another group where they've had the doctor saying, wear this thing, and then the doctor will feed back, and that seems to, from their research, has worked quite well.
Yeah, and as before you were saying, what we sort of notice is that social link prescribers have their own activity database. Yeah. And what we want, and they did use an older model of this, which was called Get Active Bolton. Yeah. So we're trying to sort of not reinvent the wheel, we're just sort of updating it so they can use it. And when we've got that insight back, hopefully we can obviously go through our public health channels and say this is what we're learning from the ground, but it's then adapting ourselves as well to sort of see what more could we be doing. Yeah. So the key thing was the digital offer at this moment in time. is not there. So I think we've all seen leisure centres and sort of stuff, putting stuff on the digital platforms and stuff. But the other side that we're looking at is when that funding runs out, is how community clubs are going to utilise that. Would they just shy away and go back to sort of just doing community sessions? Because I think, again, in our last session, what we were talking about, when we've been contacting those who have been shielding, a lot of them are scared to go out and probably won't come out until there's a vaccine. So we're looking around about 18 months, 2 years, realistically. And to get engage those, we need to be offering something different. So again, it's, yes, using social prescribers to our best ability. They've got a lot of activities that could feed into the database, but again, we're just a signposting site, not actually holding type of sessions. And then obviously the conversations would happen of what could we be doing with this data.
And also I was going to say was, how will you ensure that this is delivered now and that the richness of the lockdown data that you've mentioned and making sure you're getting people active because they're already on that journey is captured?
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges. The annoying part, we could be doing this right now, but we've got to get political approval. It's just the way our council works. So yes, I'm not going to lie, there will be probably a missed opportunity, but again, it's working on relationships. So we're going through Bolton CVS and Bolton Community Trust. Bolton Community Trust have got real good links into our social housing providers, and they've identified groups that are willing to sort of be part of this project. And then you've got Bolton CVS are going through the community settings. So it's utilising them database and relationships. But yes, we only focus on 2 cohorts, so we're not reaching out to everyone. We're having up to 50 individuals. Yes, some people will be missed. We're aware of that, but hopefully, from a journey perspective, is when word of mouth, when people find out this is going on and what they could be doing, yes, they weren't part of the conversation at the start, but they will be part of the conversation later on. Yeah, you are right there, Claire. Yeah, you could miss the boat, but yeah, political approval is just what's stopping it happening right now.
Okay.
Can you go into any more detail around your buddying system plans for the app as well?
Yeah, so the buddying system plan is 2 factors. So when the session is there, a lot of our work around the community settings is having a buddying icon. So they know when you see a session is to say buddying is available. So when people sort of see this icon, they know that they can obviously ring up and it is available there. Because one element, if I ring, say, Nicole, if I ring you saying there's an athletics training, you'd say, yeah, it happens at 6 o'clock, and that's the end of this conversation. Where if there was a system where you advertise the sessions and you could sort of see it happens at 6 o'clock and you saw an icon say buddying available, you already know that obviously I can contact you beforehand and we can meet up. That's one element. So it's upskilling our community settings around that. And the other part is creating an online community platform where hopefully from other projects that we've seen that people can contact each other. So it's I'm going to this walking session, does anyone fancy me coming? So it's basically creating a community there. We've not got an official buddying system. I've sort of labelled it as a community engagement board where people can talk to each other, say they found this interesting, they're going for a walk, they're going for a run, does anyone want to be able? But at this moment in time, it's only focusing on them 50 individuals. When it gets upscaled, yes, then questions will have to be looked into in regards to can we get something more official. But yeah, it's just a community board where people can talk about what they're doing and if people want to join in.
Wahid, I was just going to ask a couple of quick ones. So first off, in relation to that digital offer, that platform, obviously it's quite broad and I suppose maybe captures like really local activity really well. Given your sort of target areas, your target population, how are you going to make sure that the right people are targeted? Those inactive people are shown this and know that it's there and how to use it on a regular basis?
Yeah, so the people that they'll be identified through Bolton CBS and Bolton Community Trust, so they've got them links into them cohorts, so they'll be the individuals that will be identified. And some to Claire's point is we are conscious that everyone won't know about it, but we want to start small and then upscale. So yeah, they are being identified and they're already known to agencies that we're working with that are from. If you look at the pre-work, there'll be questions in regards to were they exercising pre-COVID and they're exercising now. Right, you fit in our box, we'll use you, and then other individuals. So yeah.
Okay. And then sort of a follow-on from that was obviously you've already talked about how during this time people are possibly more active than they usually were for different reasons, for like mental health reasons or whatever. We've identified in Salford there's a lot of sort of online burnout happening now, that people have kind of got a bit sick of it, doing stuff like this on a regular basis when it's not typical of how they usually behave. Same with activity engagement. Is there a way that you've maybe thought about how you would keep this sort of, I suppose, engaging long term?
Yeah, so you're totally right around about the burnout. Everyone's zoomed out as we use that phrase, but it's thinking about it twofold is we're going to have sessions going that are adapted, that take into account social distancing. So those individuals, obviously they are wearing a Garmin device, so we're monitoring if they're going out exercising, whether they're going for walking or doing any type of physical activity. But we do also understand that Zoom still or digital offering still has its place, because you've got them individuals that will not leave the house until there is a vaccine. So yes, we are conscious in regards to people are zoomed out, but at this moment in time, unless other localities can tell me, I can't think of another way of engaging with individuals that probably won't leave the household because they're scared. So it's basically having a different offers available. If you're willing to leave your household, this is on your doorstep and this is what you can be engaged with. If you're not doing it, then this is what you could be doing online. And another thing that I picked up from Ben from Empower You was we try, and again, it all depends on, and this is again in the 6 month time, is not to do static videos in regards to here's a session, this is what you can be doing. It's the community, it needs to be live, so then the conversation part of hi Mike, what's going on, are you finding everything okay, etc., etc. Because when it's static, you just miss that engagement or relationship part. So it's basically saying to the groups, yes, do your adaptive sessions locally, but please once a week do something online that people can sort of engage with there. Because yeah, people just, from the shielded conversations that we're having through our community hub, people are, now there's more people on the streets or in the park, they're scared to go in there. So it's trying to do what's best for them, which is only Zoom, which I can think of, sorry.
Yeah. Cool.
Had another question and you brought Bren up. One of my questions was, it's easy to use and understandable. Will it be accessible for lots of different people, like easy read formats, and if anybody's got learning or visual impairments, is this sort of provision for that?
No, do you know what? I've not even considered that. I know it's user based, so it's so mobile friendly. So obviously when you have apps, obviously sometimes they get spam. It will be user friendly. But yeah, the question there is about the other argument, which we've not taken into account. Well, yeah, as part of the insight, we've not taken into account. So yeah, do you know what? That's a really good tool. I'll take that forward.
Just chat with Benny, I'll sort you out. I'll help you.
No, definitely. I definitely think that'd be useful.
I need to shoot off to another meeting now, but I'll send you some stuff. Wahid, feedback.
Thanks, Hannah.
Cool. See you later.
See you later.
Wahid, obviously you've spoken about the challenge of kind of getting it on the table and kind of getting it in front of the right people. From your point of view, is there any support that Is there anything that you feel like you need in terms of either a central GM team or from other localities? Like, is there anything that you think would give you that extra boost that you need?
I think from a support mechanism, I've always sort of said that GM aligns itself strategic with our like chief execs, so we can get that support. Because obviously, from a community level, we're making a lot of noise on the ground, but it's to engage those people at the top. I keep saying the chief exec. So I know Hayley's having conversations using the inequalities funding around that, and she's doing well. It's the only avenues is again, and I touched base with Richard about this, was about the political approval part, which is the process that we're still in, where we had to get political approval for everything we do. The local part is about moving with the times in regards to if the funding tells us to fund it, we should do it right here, right now. And as Claire's alluded to, is you might miss the boat, and there's a clear example of not like I said, red tape getting in the way of doing it right here, right now, in that moment. So from a GM perspective, it's obviously we are getting that support. It's just obviously Bolton's very focused around recovery and economy. So hence why we've sort of gone with the vitality model about badges. And once we can use that about people can do so many exercises or fitness levels or activity steps, they can get something. There's the drive, oh, we like the sound of this, but COVID, like I said, I understand now from that level, is being bombarded with loads of things that people could be doing. And yeah, how do you make it relevant? So yeah, GM, I think Hayley's doing a good job in the inequalities part. She's having conversations with the NHS from Bolton. So
where do you think that comes from, Wahid? Is it kind of like a previous history? Is it that kind of, for me, it sounds a bit risk averse almost. So is it previous history? Is it something to do with bureaucracy within the organisation, or is it a combination of all of them? I mean, you know, is it something to do with the personal relationships between senior managers? Like why is it taking so long to get through something that obviously is quite time sensitive?
I'm being recorded here, Nicole. Yes.
It won't be shared. It won't be shared with anyone we need.
It's in a nutshell, it's exactly what the local part's about. Is if it's not part of the system, then it won't change. And our assistant directors come from a very policy background, and everything has to be run by the books. It wasn't like this beforehand, because you used to have a bit of leeway, such as like, yes, if it fits in with the principles of the local delivery part, then go ahead. But yeah, so if you can make it part of the system, then you wouldn't need to do this part, because it's part of the system that when someone thought of identified a project and stuff, you can go ahead with it. But yeah, purely because of our assistant director who's come from it's not his fault, that's the way that his mind works.
Whose job is it to get the political backing?
How
do you get the political backing? What's the process to get that?
So we would write it in a report that would then get signed up to Paul, who is our assistant director, and then he would then present it to DLT, department leadership team, and that would go out to everyone, and someone would say, yeah, that's okay to do. But yeah, being honest, it's whoever's sort of leading your ship. If it were me, we were bossing it, wouldn't we? But unfortunately, I'm not there yet.
No, it's fair enough. It's interesting to understand like the different mechanisms within the different areas. I think it's just it's frustrating.